Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene the fourth of 5 sessions on the future of God. The phenomenon of God is simultaneously the most present issue because it confronts us with creation of which we're a part. But it's also the most elusive of issues because as finite beings, we cannot comprehend the infinite. And I wanted to dwell on this paradox in our human experience of God as we deepen this conversation, which has been so rich and so textured. And to say that most of the conversations that we've had thus far fall into what they call the apophatic tradition about God, as contrasted with the cataphatic tradition. And I want to just explore those for a moment, because I think if we understand those distinctions, we're better able to both honor the mystery and honor also what can be said and what cannot be said. The apophatic tradition is present in every religious and spiritual tradition, because human beings everywhere, as they approach the holy, bifurcate between that which can be known and that which cannot be known. In the apophatic tradition, understanding that in some deeply mysterious way, creator and creation cohere together as a single interrelated whole, accentuate the reality that the beauty of divinity is manifest in the incarnated creation. So in that sense, God can be known. And many of the statements this week, I'm remembering back to Michael Negler, where he said you can experience God as an individual, in community, in nature. Rabbi Cat similarly talking about how we can know God and experience God because of the omnipresence of God, and therefore the accessibility of God in everything that is. In contrast to this is the cataphatic tradition, which says that while the beauty of the divine can be known, the glory is hidden and cannot be known. You know, one thinks of the Tao Te Ching, the opening lines of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. And so this is the way of negation, saying that in the end, language itself, no matter how articulate, fails to even approach the hem of the garment of God. Remembering Moses during Sinai wanted to see God. God said, if I showed you, you would be killed. But he allowed Moses to see the hem of his garment as he passed by. And that's that cataphatic notion that the Holy of Holies is beyond words. It's beyond vision. It's beyond hearing, what the Kabbalists call the Ein Sof, that which cannot be spoken. And so holding these two polarities between what can be known and what cannot be known, knowing that the via positiva and the via negativa, paradoxically, end in the same point. And that is the transformation of the human heart. You know, one of the great works of literature over the last 100 years was Nikos Kazantzakis's great work, his novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, in which he describes that as Jesus was hanging on the cross. He had one last temptation. And that was the temptation around the woman that he most deeply loved, Mary Magdalene. And before he died, he had to surrender even his love. And Kazantzakis makes an extraordinary point. He said, in that instant, Jesus understood the deepest mystery of the divine, that God is always receding. That whatever we grasp, whatever we think we know or don't know, God is always receding, even as divinity encompasses every moment of every day. And that leads me to the final point that I want to say today as we introduce this session, and knowing that we're going to be talking about Carl Jung on these matters, that toward the end of his life, he was asked in an interview whether he believed in God or not. And he said, I don't believe in God. I know God. And I think that the ability to make that statement, in my perspective, is one of the deepest statements one can make about God, that even in the beauty that's manifest and the glory that's unmanifest, it's possible for we humans to know that out of which we came and back into which we all go. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce my very good friend, Dr. Tom Eddington, who will commence our program. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, Jim, thank you so much for your opening comments and remarks. And I'm going to be very brief and just bring Michael Putz in to introduce our guest today, Brother Don Bisson, and get on with the program because we've got a very, very rich conversation today. Hey, Michael.
Thank you, Tom. Hey, it's good to see you, Tom. I can't believe what a wonderful introduction, Jim. Just spectacular. Couldn't have done it better. I should have had you kick off the week that way. That would have been fantastic. And I was going to exactly use that Jung quote. I tell you, because it's hanging on my wall at home. So just to give it away, I'm very much into the Jungian perspective because it wasn't that I found a set of ideas I liked in Jung. I found a recognition of experience. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you is Jung had a recognition of God. It wasn't just an intellectual understanding. When I found Jung's work, I had a recognition of a shared reality I didn't have a name for when I read Jung's work. And today we have a real incredible guest here, Brother Don Bisson. And Brother Don has a remarkable blend of skills. One is he's a Marist Brother. And his primary profession has been a spiritual director, but not only that, a teacher of spiritual direction to hundreds of spiritual directors who have worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. His work is a combination of spiritual direction, and he has a PhD in Jungian psychology. But most of all, he's a deep practitioner of the Christian way, in Christian mysticism. And he's been co-journeying with hundreds of people and taught thousands and his journey. And so what's special, just to refer to Jung in another way, is that Jung was always first and foremost a practitioner. He wasn't a theoretician. He used himself as his own life was an instrument of exploration, and also the work he did with his clients. And one of the things that was spectacular about Jung is that by understanding the unconscious, he could see shifts and changes in the culture. He could see things when he was well before World War II. He knew the war was coming because he could see it in the dreams of the unconscious of his patients. And so you can see remarkable currents in the collective unconscious. If you have the privilege of working with people in an intimate way, you can see what's emerging well before it shows up in the culture. And so from all those reasons, I think it's going to be spectacular to have Brother Don on today. And what we're going to have Brother Don speak to us about is going to be the spiritual roots of the polycrisis, the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, and the meaning crisis. And also not only talk about those roots, but how we might heal them and create a better world. So, Brother Don, welcome. It's a privilege to see you today, and I'm looking forward to you just sharing with us your perspective on the crisis, where it's going, and what you're hearing from people out there in the world, and what your hope is going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction, your kind words. I'm happy to be with all of you. I'm in my basement office here in the Bronx in New York. I have my bars on the windows and all the effects of living in the city. But here you'll have Jung in the background here is my office. And I want to share with you the particular perspective I'm coming today. I think Michael did a great job in introducing this, but I was a spiritual director before I came into Jungian psychology. But I always find people discover Jung not by intellectual interest, but by psychological needs. You know, I had gone through a major transition in my life in my 30s, and there was a complete reorientation of my choices, and there was a revolution. And it was a revolution that came from the unconscious to my consciousness, which then forced me to make different life changes because I took the dream seriously. And I began this study in Jung and Christianity based upon a dream some 40 years ago. So I'd like to start with the dream because it indicated what Jung oftentimes said is, you have a dream, a big dream, and you spend your rest of your life living into it. That is, I had no inclination of the impact of what that dream was going to be. The dream created me, and now I know the meaning of the dream as I end my life. So in the dream, there was a huge basilica called St. Peter and St. Paul's, which I think represents the institutional church and its structure. But in the dream, the interiority of the church was so destroyed by leaks and lack of use that the interiority of the church needed a complete reconstruction. And I was in one corner on the left side of the church, and I'm working by myself. And every person, there were thousands of people there, and each person had their own tools. And like craftsmen, you know, all the tools had a wooden handle, kind of very delicate work. And as I put down my tool, as I'm working in the corner there, I see written on the wood, Jungian Construction Company. And it was at that moment, I was in the middle of discerning, should I go on for doctoral studies or not? And there were so many obstacles, financial, time, or whatever, that I had pretty much given up on the hope of doing it. And after that dream, I said, doors will open, I'm gonna move ahead. And that was 40 years ago. So I am living from the insights that came primarily from my studies before and after. I have degrees in theology, liturgy, pastoral care, but post this dream, this is when I studied transpersonal psychology, dream work, and the Christian Union dialogue at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Because of my life as a Marist Brother and the opportunities that I've had, I've given many retreats, weekends, long retreats, directed retreats, preached retreats, guided retreats, which, as Michael has said, probably over the years have been thousands of people, not only in the United States, but Canada and Asia, Africa, Europe, where I was exposed to many cultures, many peoples, many races, and listening to dreams from men, women of every kind of sexual orientation in geographic and international settings in Asia, Africa, and throughout Europe and the United States and Canada. Having had the privilege of living 25 years in the inner cities of New York, Oakland, and Chicago, I was exposed to also the social ills, the racial difficulties, the prejudices, and the collective shadow of our own culture. And here in the Bronx, I have been doing the training of spiritual directors from a multicultural inner city environment, where this coming month, we're beginning our 4th program for African American, Hispanic, Latino, Chinese, Korean, multicultural abilities to take spiritual direction and apply it in their own cultures, in their own religious traditions. So my life has been very deeply enriched by Jung. If anything, it has completely manifested itself in that way. I remember one funny dream about Jung is that I was traveling, and this is how old it was. I still had traveler's checks, and in the dream, I go to a bank to exchange my traveler's checks in Zurich, and I get this, I translate the money, the resources from one to another, okay? The name of the bank was Jung's Path. So the dreams will let you know where you're going on this. I want to start with quotes from Jung himself that I think can apply, prophetic individuals like himself and Thomas Merton can write things 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago that are still not only relevant, but we haven't dealt with them at all yet. They still need to be mined. The first thing he said in the 1950s, he said, technology has outpaced our consciousness. And that is our greatest difficulty and evil. Our technology has outpaced our consciousness. Now, this has all to do with global warming, science, and so forth. And we have throughout the world, a huge denial around science and around technology. And at the same time, we've completely bought into it. At the same time, there's this ambiguous relationship to technology. He says, for so many people today, life has become stale and is no longer the exponent of the complete person. People live as though they were walking in shoes too small. I love that image. That quality of eternity, which is so characteristic of the life of more simple individuals, is entirely lacking in our culture. So the lack of the sense of eternity, this is what the introduction was saying, the lack of this apophatic, intuitive relationship to the eternal, to the mystical, is lacking to the point where You know, I think our materialism and our struggles are based to the fact that we're not connected to something beyond ourselves. And Jung equated meaning with energy. Where there is energy, there is meaning. Where there is no meaning, there is no energy. And if there's no energy, then we have to find a substitute. And the substitute, I think, is our over-addictive society, our materialistic way of living, the way that we abuse our environment and the planet is based upon a lack of a sense of the sacred and the eternal in our midst. He said in a quote to one of his colleagues, this is not in print, it was in a letter from a pastor. He said, there's a deep need in the world for guidance today, a new form of spiritual direction. Because what he found was people were held and contained in religious institutions, but they were feeling the same lack of eternity as people who have no religious traditions. That religion was not fulfilling its need for the sacred. In the 1930s, and this is where Michael was saying about his intuition, in the 1930s, during the worst of the uprising of Nazism and fascism throughout Europe, he said, in the midst of this darkness, I feel our only hope is small communities of contemplative consciousness. These will serve as lights on the mountaintops to provide hope for the future of mankind. I think we could apply this statement to our own living situation at the moment, that the hope, which is based upon something that we can't see yet, if we can see it, we don't need hope. Hope is something that I cannot yet see, but I intuitively is drawn to. And I suggest that what he was saying here, these communities of consciousness, these points of light along the way, are extremely significant to the future of our species. And it seems that this organization and the purpose of this organization is to help provide communities of consciousness to be able to not only support each other, but being able to be witnesses to a larger movement. I found that this Jungian transpersonal perspective on spiritual direction takes into account that the voice of God is still experienced in the depths of the human soul. I have been marinated in 40 years of listening to religious experience. And I can testify to you that the voice of God is alive and well in the souls of these individuals. How do we know? Because it's that still small voice of conscience and consciousness that leads us to awaken. The voice of God, you know, it's interesting. Jung said that what he found so peculiar about Christians that they could find God everywhere except in the human soul. And his rediscovery of the voice, capital V, that gives it the fact that this is not an exclusive club of only those who have a certain life. You don't have to be a Buddhist monk or a Christian monk. Every human being has been bestowed this voice, this connection to the divine. And Anne Ulanoff, who's a theologian and a Jungian analyst, says this voice is that dimension of the soul already in harmony with what we call God, that it already exists. We don't have to create it. We need to work at removing the obstacles to receive it more purely. His wisdom also told us that the unconscious is not filled only with darkness, but it is also filled with light. There is a dark side to the unconscious that is not friendly to the ego, but there is also dimensions within the unconscious that is the medium in which we experience light. Holy darkness, right? Holy darkness is the place of the apophatic prayer, where there are no images, there is no voice, it is pure darkness. But we have to recognize, and I'm co-writing a book on evil, there's a difference between holy darkness and unholy darkness. Holy darkness is the transformative process of being diminished and being embraced by the totality of silence and emptiness. That has a holy darkness. But unholy darkness, which is also a reality, wants to absorb, deny life, deny the purpose of existence, and it's a darkness that moves towards despair. And as a spiritual director, you have to really help people discern, is this the call of holy darkness, silent meditation, or is this an unholy darkness that slowly evolves and takes away life, does not enhance life? Another aspect of the soul about this issue is the wound of our existence. All of us acquire wounds. None of us are freed from the wounding from parents, society, culture, gender issues. We all carry wounds. And like holy darkness and unholy darkness, that wound can either lead us into an obsessive, addictive desire to fill it up, or the wound, as Jung says, becomes the womb, the place of rebirth. The only place we can be reborn is in our original wound. It's not the glorious parts of us. It is the most wounded and vulnerable parts of us that are the transformative aspects. So we have to trust also that what I see working in human souls is the continuing desire to create images. God is an image maker, and God also destroys images. This is the paradox. God destroys images of idolatry and creates images of connection. But no image in any tradition or in any psyche can discover all of what it means to be in relationship with God. Jung said if you destroyed every image of divinity in the world, it would all reemerge in some fashion from the psyche, because the psyche is the one that creates the images of God. And images of God in religious traditions are, for me, the language of a tradition. It's a language towards God. You know, and it's not the fact that there's only one language. There are many different languages. Recently, Pope Francis, scandalized a lot of Christians and conservative Catholics by saying a very simple fact, which I thought was just a simple fact. He said in an interfaith dialogue place in Indonesia, he said simply that he believed that God's intention was to create more than one path to himself. That there are many paths, and Christianity is a path, but it shouldn't subsume all paths. Now, this is, of course, contradictory to some of the established interpretations of dogma, and rebellious against, and we'll talk about, fundamentalists in a moment. That we have to realize that our soul creates languages both within our tradition. I What I find fascinating is that I have a Jewish directee who's deeply spiritual and studies the Kabbalah and is a mystic. All of her language is Jewish. God uses the language of her tradition and of her faith to bring her to this deeper place. Okay? Now, I'm a Catholic. Catholics have mass dreams all the time because it's the major symbol of transformation. Okay? I mean, whatever your tradition is, you're going to have that language is available by the unconscious to communicate to you. But sometimes it goes on an archetypal level, and the language of God is outside of your realm of personal experience. I mean, I went through, a series of dreams, a dream series in which I'm in the Ganges, going through all kinds of rituals. Now, they were all initiation dreams, but for whatever reason, the unconscious chose me to go into another tradition to understand what I was going through and what kinds of disciplines I needed to do in order to go through that phase. So we also have to realize, and Jung was very concerned about this, that we are very naive around the issue of evil. We find evil in the wrong place. We project evil in the wrong people. And he talked about the reality of evil. And he was always shocked that, that Christian practitioners didn't really want to talk about the reality of evil. It was kind of like a theological thing out there. And I assure you, having lived as I have in all these different places, I have encountered the profound experience of God and the profound experience of the absence of God in people's experience of their souls. The soul is also paradoxical. It's not linear. Okay, so just solving the problem of the outer world cannot be done simply by logic and linear thinking. You got to think of the paradox. What is the paradox? The paradox is we're like destroying our own nest, our own place. Okay, we're in the process of counterintuitively create more darkness, and this is just like this thing on these huge storms that are coming up. I mean, we've known, this is the inconvenient truth. Let's not talk about this now. Well, no, we haven't talked about it for the last 20 years, seriously, about what we should be leading the world in because of the greed and the ego. And Jung was also a believer that, in the 19th century, there was a great deal of effort on demythologizing scripture, going back to what occurred, blah, 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 blah. He really felt that the problem with religion is that we need to re-mythologize. By re-mythologizing, it doesn't mean going back into the unconscious projection that this is linear truth, but we have to see the spiritual and symbolic meaning of the events in scripture in order to gain the real meaning of it. And that's why we have the difficulties that we have at the moment. Nietzsche said that God is dead. I believe that God is not dead. God is just deeply wounded, contaminated, and polluted with all kinds of imagery of power, abuse, patriarchy, etc. What I have found, because of the people that I think tend to come to me, is they don't say it in the first session, but the bottom line is their God imagery has fallen apart. There is no more connection to the God that they knew. Now, from my experiences, when your God image dies, a large portion of the meaning of your life even though it was distorted, is now lost, and there is a period of liminality that's deeply upsetting and feeling disorientating, because if your God image dies, your image of yourself is also dying. Who you are and who you have been. Okay? So I believe we're in a period in which God is not dead, but toxic and needs healing. And so many people who have walked away from the tradition is not because just that they haven't found it meaningful. The God that they knew is not expressed any longer in the collective. There's a disorientation. Now, in this crisis moment, this is how I interpret this. There are two methods that I have noticed with many people trying to heal unconsciously their unconscious God wounding. One is, and now this is paradoxical, right? The most wounded around their God image become fundamentalists. Because it's not that they believe what they are saying. They have to believe what they are saying, or the whole thing collapses. So fundamentalism and the restoration of unquestionable orthodoxy and the irrational attempt to bring all that toxicity back, okay, is fundamentally a self-defense mechanism for a dying God. The fundamentalism is really a manipulation of the reality to sustain something which most people have already gotten away from. Why is there so much defense about everything around the God image? And of course, the problem is if you still feel literally that God created the world in 7 days and so forth and so on, your sense of evolution and the place of humanity in evolution is completely lost. It's all about a static image of God and a static image of, a reality that just isn't real. If you talk to only people who believe that the world is flat, the world is flat, no matter what the facts say. The other end of the spectrum, and this is where I have done a lot of work with people, I believe Buddhism is the emergency room for toxic Jews and Christians around their images of God. It's the emergency room. They don't know where to go. Their images are completely, wrong, okay? So they have to go to a practice where there's no God imagery. Now, I can't tell you the number of directees that I have had, and I have had many Jewish directees, that you have secular Jews who reject the tradition post-Holocaust, go to Buddhism for the emergency room, go into deep spiritual practice for a long period of time, rediscover some deep connection to what they would call the divine, and on top of that, begin to understand their own psychological imprint of what has led them to this. So Zen Buddhism is that apophatic healing presence that gets rid of God imagery. And you know what happens? The God imagery comes back again, but not wounded, but more in sync with their own soul. I cannot tell you the number of Jews that I've had who are Buddhist practitioners who come to a Christian spiritual director to go back to Judaism. And that happens all the time. It's like, well, and they're always hesitant at first, like, well, I've been doing Buddhist practice. Okay, tell me about, because it's like there's almost a shame along with this aspect. So I believe that this is the way in which God is manifesting God's self by purifying and destroying images that no longer can stand the idolatry of the past. Has to be wiped out. And then, you know what happens? Within the psyche, the proper images and cataphatic tradition emerges again, more whole and more deeply rooted in experience. Now, then the crisis becomes, I've gone through this with Christians the same way, is where do I go to find a community that gets it? If I go back to my old synagogue, they don't have a clue. I'm a renegade. Like where does this go? If you go to church on Sunday and there, the homily is like, what the hell is he talking about? I want to come back. But here's the thing that Jung said. If you go back to a tradition, you're not going back, you're going forward. You have to bring the cleansed, healed version of your experience. Unfortunately, sometimes what I do, depending on the community that I'm in, I will be at Sunday Mass, and in the middle of Mass, I want to scream. I just want to scream. Not just because of what the priest says. I want to scream because I want to scream, it's all dead. Don't you understand that we can do the same thing with life, but it's all dead. What you are saying is dead. So the biggest challenge is in this awakening, and this awakening can happen in relationship to the earth and the planetary and evolution and so forth. There is no going back. There's only a going forward. And Jung said that, basically in terms of community, you either find these small communities of consciousness that you can relate to and begin to re-ritualize what's happening. I have had so many of these folks, especially Christians, okay, that have Christmas dreams. Just when they're about ready to move back into the dialogue with Christianity, they have Christmas dreams, of course. Okay? The eternal is being born once again in an incarnational way. So the image of Christmas is about translating in your own experience the transformative language of a religious tradition. I'll give you an example. I had a directee who came to a new understanding of God through his recovery from alcohol and addiction, okay? And therefore, he worked as a practitioner of the 12 steps. And this is where he rediscovered, the power of God. He had this dream, just as he was struggling with, who am I in religious terms? And it was a very numinous dream. And in the dream, there is a Christmas tree, and near the Christmas tree, there is an angel figure, the kind of just like a symbol of light, who can dialogue. So in the dream, he's dialoguing with this angelic figure. And underneath the Christmas tree, there are two, if you hear the sirens, we're in the Bronx, underneath the Christmas tree, there are two exact same train sets, little train sets, that children have. And the angel says, you can only have one of these. You must be able to choose. The angel explains the difference between the two train sets. One train set is operated through batteries, and the other is connected to the wall. She says, you can choose the ones with the batteries, but it's going to wear off. if you choose the one that's connected to the higher power, it will never go off. And then he had to recognize that the higher power here is the divine birth, is the incarnation that's connected to something greater than himself. So what happens is the unconscious begins to bridge experience and symbols. Also, this interest in mysticism is not an artificial interest, because if you've gone through this process, you've already had a process of suffering, death, and resurrection, which is the Paschal mystery and is the archetypal dynamic of transformation. So the question here is, I must be able to connect between my nature and divine nature. The human and the divine dance has to occur. And it is the mystics of our own tradition that have done this for us. Okay? Now, let me say something about the shadow, because I think we have to recognize that one of the main obstacles for change is that the collective shadow is committed to remaining the same. No, the addiction is to repeating what we know doesn't work. Okay? And the collective shadow is the group or culture's ideals, which in turn produce shadow material. Shadow material resists change and learning from each other. The personal shadow and its complexes begin to unite with others who are akin with the same shadow. Jung said, there is no such greater delight than discovering who your enemy is. And this is the problem that we have right now, right? This is the shadow is saying, it's so easy to see what I don't want to see in myself, but I see clearly in you. And we are existing as a culture right now, 50-50, shadow projections onto each other. It's an underlying darkness that of not facing our past or the fear of our own future. We live with the illusions of total freedom when we're not free. I gave a retreat this summer where Michael attended, and like, what is true freedom? You know, is it freedom according to what we think freedom is as a culture, which is really license, not freedom? And is there a pattern, a primordial pattern of darkness, kind of a dynamic agency whose malevolence is active among groups to really destroy creation, to destroy life itself? Now, I want to say something about how we are moved to be involved in this. How do we awaken? How do we get shook up? How do we change? Those of you that are therapists or, you know, teachers or whatever, right? There's always, you know, you come into therapy, right? You're paying $150 for 50 minutes. And you're in resistance the entire time except the last minute. Because you want change, but you don't want change. You don't want the change that maybe effectively will destroy your ideals of your ideal. So I think this deep human desire, for change is always ambivalent, because it is the art of letting go of our ideals and the illusions of what will make me happy. And all of us have a contract with God that says, give me the following things in order for me to be happy. And we expect God to play God's role as God and to give us these things. But what I keep saying to directees, God never signed that contract. That's your contract. That's not God's. God's contract is leading you to places you've never been and may have to let go of the very things that you've attached yourself to, which says, I will not be happy unless I have the following. And that is illusion. That's not joy. That's not satisfaction. That's not wholeness. It is an attachment to an ideal created by the ego and then negotiated with the divine, thinking that the divine now has to be codependent on me being happy. And to be honest, I don't think God gives a crap about if you're happy or not. Are you true? Are you moving? Are you being transformed? Are you in sync with? That's the profound contract. It's not like, do you remember in the Salieri and Mozart, right? That wonderful movie. And Salieri made a deal with God. I will proclaim your joy. If you make me the best, creator of music. And what God does is he chooses, in his view, an idiot, a fool, who channels from God directly an entire requiem without a correction. That's how God works. Not our negotiation, but our flow. And Salieri didn't want to be himself. He wanted to have the gifts that Mozart had. His dialogue with the priest in the prison is a wonderful scene of like, I am the patron saint of mediocrity. It's just a wonderful. Now, I think we realize that the call is involuntary. In other words, there is a draw to the eternal that I did not choose, but continues through divine intervention and human condition, calls us to something further. Okay? Now, this is involuntary. Now, we can do two things in this involuntary quest. I can fight it, or as the Taoists say, I can go with the flow. I can join the flow of my story, my humanity, my history, and see that all of it is part of the story of life. Now, if I choose to voluntarily go, to become more conscious and making the unconscious more conscious, the ego is choosing its own demise. Okay? You can either choose to inflate, to enhance, to neglect, or you can choose to reorientate. And the irony is, letting go of the ego, paradoxically, strengthens the ego. Because now I have the capacity to make a choice against myself. I am free enough to say, I don't need this in order to be fulfilled. So this dynamic is I'm drawn involuntarily, and then I have to choose. Do I choose to go with the flow or not? This new God image that we are in relationship to in this apophatic way has its roots in the tradition of Catholicism and Christianity in the, for instance, the medieval Eckhart mystic, the Dominican, in which he defined the interior self. He says that God can be born within if we create a place for that birth to take place. Where is God going to be born? In the very darkness and poverty that we don't want to see. The creche, okay, is the instinctual animal self. You know, Christ is surrounded by animals. The warmth of the place is given to us by animals. It's totally true that this poverty of God entering into our lives, into our instinctual embodied life. He describes the Christ within as a circle and in the center of the circle, holding all of life and reality in tension and in wholeness. What is the neurotic ego that fights this? The face of the neurotic ego, where David Rico and I have worked together, is fear, attachments, control, and entitlement. Okay, the face of the ego is fear, attachments, control, and entitlement. This is the ego that gets neuroticized, that gets attached to a phase of their life and not wanting to move beyond that phase. You see this in the spirituality of aging, right? People who hold on to a self that is gone. And in order to hold on to it, they get more fearful, more attached, more controlling, and more a sense of entitlement. The true self, okay, the true self is freedom, acceptance, compassion, and energy. And the journey of life is to move from one to another. It is not the destruction of the ego. It is the question is, those four things is the face of the neurotic ego. When I'm holding on to an identity, I'm wearing shoes too small, where I am, fearful of what's next. Okay. And what's happening is we have a society that is over the top with anxiety. We are very anxious for many different reasons. We are anxious about everything. If the stock market goes up, this is great, but then I become anxious. When is it going to come down? And what should I sell before it goes? It's like there's this tremendous anxiety, fear, attachments, control, and entitlement. Therefore, apophatic prayer is the cleansing of that in silence. It's centering prayer. It's forms of prayer that diminishes our ego attachments. Then we can move to freedom, acceptance, compassion, and energy. The problem that we have collectively in dealing with the problems of the world and ecology has to do with our attachments to fear, attachments, control, and entitlement, especially entitlement. You know, it's amazing how entitled we are, and I think that's true as a culture. And the thing is, the more you have compassion, the more energy you have. The less compassion you have, the decreasing of energy and the fear that you have. As a spiritual director, I witnessed this process over and over again, this transformation. Let me just say that the transformation between neurotic ego and true self is a lifetime journey. And every phase of our life, every stage of our life is an invitation to go deeper. You know, many people have this accommodating view of transformation. Like, I have it in my pocket and now I can live on cruise control till the end. Transformation is not a definition and it's not definitive. It's a continual process. Like, it's not like I was transformed. Well, you can say I was evolved in a transformation earlier in my life, but that I've outgrown that transformation. I'm ready for another one. So there is always revolution and evolution going on. The evolution is the lifelong process of moving towards this divine center. There's slow growth, and then there's revolutionary growth, seismic growth, in which you will never be the same. So I'd like to recognize here at the end that my nature as a person and my ability to be transformed as a person has a direct relationship to our transformation as a whole. Jung indicated that the best way to do social justice is to redeem your own shadow and to begin to see reality as it is. I'm going to end my reflections with some insights by Thomas Merton, who was a religious figure that was in dialogue with all the people of his times. Okay? He defined this place in the French term, le point vierge, the point of emptiness, the virginal emptiness, nothingness, absolute poverty. To make concrete connections to that dimension of the soul, he says beautifully, at that point, it's no longer what we have to be, it's the acceptance of who we are. When you have an encounter with that, you're not creating it, you're discovering it. You know, I always say, you know, it's like the Wizard of Oz. She had the ruby slippers all along, she didn't know it. You know, you've got this your whole life, and then all of a sudden you realize, I have it. I don't have to work for it. But I've had to do a lot of digging and cleansing in order to get to it. And in the new religion and science, including psychology, life and creation is a dynamic, organic phenomenon. Nothing is permanent except change. And that energy impacts us for good or ill, depending on how we use that psychic energy in the world. And that linear time and space are not complete realities. They're operational concepts that allow us to live, but they're not the total truth of being. From a Christian perspective, the primary energy in the universe, as Chardin calls it, is love. That the God energy of love, agape, is what keeps the universe moving. It's no longer the old redemption of having to feel shamed at being a sinner, but the transformative movement of suffering what it means to truly love and to let go of my egocentricity. Redemption is necessary. Okay, the higher power is necessary. God is always necessary, but it's even influenced the future, which gives us the ability to say there is nothing that is too late. It's never too late. It's never too late to wake up. It's never too late to feel connected. There's always a possibility. So we began with the invitation to live into our shoes. We need new forms of spiritual guidance. And our hope is in the development of communities of consciousness that helps move the consciousness of the world. If any of you are interested, and I'm in the process of getting an entirely new website, which will be called Jungian Christian Dialogue. The old website, which is still there, is donbisson.org. And the website for my lectures is Yes Now Productions. I have 100, if you go to Yes Now Productions, you will find 106 topics that I have done with this Jungian Christian dialogue. And some of them are retreats, training programs, intensives. So if you're interested, is Yes Now Productions and donbisson.org. And by the end of the month, we should have Jungian Christian Dialogue as a new website. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Don. That was extraordinary. I'm going to have to rewatch this video recording on a number of occasions to fully take in everything that you shared with us today. I'm moved and touched and very curious. One of the topics I'd like to pick up and then invite Michael into the conversation and bring Jim back as well. We had Father Jostrom Carithadum from the Pontifical University with us yesterday, and one of many messages that Father Josh left us with is humanity needs a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And you were speaking to that today as well. And I'm curious from your perspective, where is that paradigm shift going to come from, and what form might it take?
You know, Rana said during the Second Vatican Council, as a theologian, that the future Christian will either be a mystic or nothing. And he was talking about the paradigm shift that was just in a seed form at that time. I think we're in the paradigm shift now of saying, unless I am willing to go into this depth experience of transformation, I don't have anything to contribute. Otherwise, all I have is ego and opinion. I don't have this connection to divine energy or wisdom. It's also a paradigm shift. I think, you know, being a Marist Brother, we talk a lot about a Marian church, a church based on listening. You know, we have this, the image of the Synod in Rome that is going to have the second image just the image alone is transformative. You have circular tables with cardinals, bishops, lay people, religious, all at the same table, talking about the same topic. That is the opposite of what we saw in Vatican II, where all of the bishops and cardinals were lined up in these long rows. Okay? And what's happening is there is a battle between which consciousness do we want to live from. There's this huge regression, making the church great again, and there's the forward-looking saying, how do we progress and learn from each other and discern and move into this deep prayer? So I believe there's a paradigm shift. I also believe my entire life has been in this shift. And I'm not going to see the fruit of it, but I think I've been a part of it.
Right.
Just on a personal note, I entered religious life in 1968. That's when all hell broke loose. Everybody was leaving, and I'm walking in. Okay? My entire life has been in diminishment. My entire life is diminishing from that image. But I also believe my entire life is in the recreation of a new image that is fermenting, but is dangerous to many. Okay? And there is going to be, and there is already, a militant resistance to this change on every level: political, religious, social. There are things that are happening that are completely beyond our control that we can either fight or we can flow.
Right. So, Brother Don,
you.
Brother Don, it's like, thank you for that. And what occurs to me is that many of us tend to try to solve the world's problems that have been created by ego with better ego. And have a battle of more virtuous egos or more evolved egos as opposed to transformed egos. And what I was hearing from you was something that we brought up as a theme earlier in the week, is this developmental foundation of the spiritual process, that we have a foolish, childlike, or dangerous view of spirituality, of saved and unsaved. And the thing is, there's unsaved, saved, lost, saved again, but the spiral where we come back to the place we were at a new level of development, we say, we found Christ. Christ is nothing. It's useless. No, I found Christ again. The Jews went through this journey of finding God, losing God, finding God, losing God. That can happen because we simply lose faith, or it could be because we went through a transformative journey and the old God image was destroyed and a new God image was created.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? I think some of the questions that are coming up from chat, where is the feminine involved in this? Which is obviously a key component of this whole, it's Mother Earth, the feminine Mother Church. We talk about all of this in terms of feminine qualities. But what is really happening is the Black Madonna, the dark, earthy feminine is coming forward with both its positive and negative powers, okay? And I think it's very important to realize that the feminine, in 1950, there was the famous doctrinal teaching of the existence of Mary's assumption into heaven, body and soul. Okay. Now, that's an ancient tradition that goes back to the 2nd century. It was confirmed in 1950. Jung said that that was the most important and significant religious event in centuries, because it was the integration not only of the feminine, but the body of the feminine, the embodiment, you know? And what I think is always funny about the creation story is that in the creation story, it's so patriarchal that a woman comes from a man. But in reality, every man has come from a woman. So there's this whole thing that life itself is a feminine reality. And the future of God is intimately interrelated with the reality of the feminine, because without the feminine, there is no rebirth. Jung says something very significant. All birth comes from the feminine, and all rebirth comes from the feminine. You cannot have rebirth without a container, without a gestation, without growth. You see? So I think it's the realization that the feminine principle has to be not in battle with the masculine, but interrelated in such a way that the principles of recreation can only, we need a recreation to save creation. This is the irony, right?
Right. So I
In
think
concert with the masculine, you need the masculine. You can't throw the masculine out. But without the feminine capacity, we don't have the capacity to recreate the image of saving creation.
right. And so, Jung talked a lot about the Black Madonna as being
Yeah.
critical. And you see in
Yes,
the Catholic tradition, you see the Black Madonna everywhere. And,
absolutely.
one of the things I think people are wondering, how do we solve the poly crisis, the ecological crisis, the climate crisis?
Right.
If I heard you right, it sounds like that to have the motive energy, the emotive energy we need, and the
Yes.
courage we need a new God image to be able to solve the ecological crisis.
Mhm.
It's not a technological solution. It's not going to be better battery technology or carbon capture. It's going to require a new God image to reform the world. Is
Yes.
that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think we have lived, particularly in the West, with the fact that nature was given to us both to name and to control. And that's a very masculine ego. You categorize and then you have power over it. Okay? So I think what's important here is that we need the other side to be integrative, where we're not controlling it by naming it or by overly controlling it, to realize that we are it. We are nature. We're not separate from nature,
Mhm.
And as conscious beings, with the technology that we have impacted nature. Now we have to make a choice to use our message that God is within nature and within us to such a radical degree that the sacrilege here is not tending the holy. This is tending the holy. Where is the holy? If the years that I lived in California, if I wanted to really experience the holy, near me there was a grove of redwood trees.
Mhm.
If I sat in the middle of a circle of redwood trees, okay, it was the most beautiful, I would say, cathedral that I've ever been in. Okay, because it expresses profoundly the rootedness in earth and the ascent into heaven.
Mhm.
And that's why the tree of life, right? This is the tree of life. And so we have to kind of remember who we are and where we come from, and that we are creatures. I mean, behind a lot of this is tremendous arrogance. tremendous arrogance, neurotic arrogance. We can control everything. You know, don't you know the government is controlling the climate now? We can, you know, the illusion that we have the capacity to control everything.
Well, brother, we thought we have a battle between the people that we call foolish, who think that someone's using, and we talk about foolish people who are uneducated, who think the world's being controlled by technology.
Yes, yes.
Then we have wise people who think all their problems will be solved by technology.
Absolutely.
And the difference is these people have
that's right.
And these people have PhDs, but they're both, one thinks technological magic is undermining the world. Other person thinks technological magic is going to solve all the problems. They're both insane.
They're both insane because you know what it is? Right. We have lost the ability to discern. To discern is I need to listen deeply to all the voices and then listen to a greater sense than my own ego here. You notice the biggest problem that we have is we have an uncontemplative view of life. There's no listening. There's no listening to each other. There's no listening to nature. There's no listening to the fabrics of what's going on. And the reclaiming of the capacity to listen, which is the contemplative life, is the only way out.
Yeah.
If we don't listen.
I think it was so magical for you to say about people who are on a path of losing their God image, then going to Buddhism to basically cleanse themselves of the broken image. And then the thought process would be, well, what we need now is sort of an ecumenical mush, right? Or technological solution. And that's not the point you're saying at all. Paradoxically,
no.
He has to go not into an ecumenical mush of the old images, like take the best of the old images and slam them together.
Oh, no. This is not new age stuff.
We're not asking for ecumenicalism we're asking for transformation of the God image in a way that no tradition has captured. It's not.
That's right. That's right.
It's a new evolution, not a creating a stew or a pick and choose.
No. It's not a smorgasbord of spiritual practices. That's New Ageism. That's not what this is about. It really is the depth experience of the holiness of people wherever they come from. You know, as they mentioned, the indigenous wisdom from our ancestors to the deepest mystical wisdoms of our traditions, and to find common ground, to be able to see, you know, one of the crises that we're having as a society is we pick and choose who's human and who's not. You know, they're not human. You know, they eat cats and dogs, and, you know, we can dehumanize people. Dehumanization, right, is also de-divinization. You no longer see the holy. So you're not just taking away their humanity, you're taking away their divine source. So this is the real crisis, that we don't see divinity where divinity is.
Yes. And I think one of the challenges is we're being asked to go beyond everything we know and to create a new God image, as you talked about it. But also, one of the things that's really challenging for myself personally is to have as much compassion as possible for people who are on the journey at a different stage of the journey than I'm at, and to see that as just as holy. That's where, you know, that's they're on that journey, and I was there just before, and I've got another place.
About the narrow gate in the kingdom, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We don't do this collectively. We have to do it individually. We have to go through the gate, right? But on the other side of the gate, there's a new collective.
Those small communities you talked about, those small
That's
groups.
what the small communities of light, that, in other words, you have to create community in order to be able to create the systems change necessary. Because it can't be just individually.
Right.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I don't want to re-demonize the people who haven't gone through the gate yet.
No, we don't want to demonize that because then we go into ego inflation.
Yes, that's what
Okay.
what I'm concerned about is I
You
know
have to be, you got to be really cautious not to do ego inflation because the alternative to ego inflation, which is very difficult, is compassion.
yes. Yes.
That's when this is the love of enemy.
Right, yeah, so I just want to say is that as I'm trying to go through the gate and I'm struggling, I see people
Yes,
who haven't gone through the gate who are attacking me, and it's very hard sometimes to have that compassion because there's
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
it's like we're being asked
Because
to do
you know
both.
what I find as a spiritual director, the number one sin of those who are going through the gate is
Mhm.
resentment.
Yes.
The number one sin, and you remember the shadow is everywhere. So even those going through the gate, it's like, oh shit, I'm going through the gate. And resentment at those who are not.
Yes.
Okay. So I think what's important is this is incredible power of compassion, which is a gift from God, not created by the ego. My ego does not have that compassion. I have to surrender to have that compassion. I have to have God take over. Otherwise, it turns into violence in a different way.
So I think this is a good point. I know we're up at almost at 9:30, and I know if we want to have a closing remark from Jim, and I also wanted to have Brother Don has a little bit of time before the top of the hour to join the after chat. So I just wanted to have Jim wrap up this really rich evening, and that was an incredible session, brother. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I particularly liked your notion of Buddhism being an emergency room for
Oh, it
for
is. It is
Christians and
absolutely
Jews. It's so true.
so
The whole
true.
Jubu
Oh yeah,
phenomenon,
the Boo Jews,
the Wu Jews and the Christian Zen and so forth and so on. I just wanted to underscore that particular point, knowing we're short of time, because as you know, that's Toynbee made the remark that the most important event of the 20th century was the arrival of Buddhism to the West. And that, I think, is very important in light of what you were saying about the Jungian understanding.
Yes.
We needed to go to East to
Mm-hmm.
recover those
That's
aspects of
right.
our own
Absolutely.
tradition that could be therapeutic. Because Jung's
That's
point
right.
was, you only are redeemed within the archetypal formation of your own culture.
Absolutely. He disregarded. He really didn't think you could become a complete Buddhist, because of the archetypes. But what I found is it is the healthiest thing for people to go through to get rid of their God imagery. It's
Yeah,
necessary.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I know people will be very eager to have you present in our after chat, and knowing that you only have a few minutes, I think we'll judiciously bring this to a close. Although I think I'm going to be in touch with you for our own conversation because
Sure.
so many aspects that I'd like to explore as a fellow Jungian.
Good. Excellent.
But Tom, Michael, why don't one of you tee us up for what's up for tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if, and I'm very sensitive to time, but I feel like we'd be very remiss if we didn't pick up on one point you did share, Brother Don, which is about evil. Jung certainly spoke to it, and more recently, Paul Levy in his book Wetiko speaks about the mind virus, and I'm wondering if there's just a quick comment or two you'd like to talk about the presence of evil.
A quick comment on evil.
Oh my
There's a
God.
challenge for
The
you.
greatest mystery in all of the cosmos, the reality of evil. I think the number one thing is you cannot destroy it. It's a reality. And
Yes.
when you attempt to destroy it, you become evil.
Hmm.
So I think the mystery of evil is we need to know how to manage its energy.
Right.
And it has a purpose that is mysterious and we don't understand it, but it is a reality, and it is the most dangerous thing that we are dealing with, because undercurrent of all of these collective shadow is the reality of evil.
Right. And I would say, brothers, that there's in earlier stages that evil can become predatory, right?
Absolutely.
But after going through the gate, and Jung would speak about this, but I think is that there is an interesting relationship of evil and good on the other side of going through that gate.
Okay, let me just leave you this little taste of what we're working with. Without evil, you wouldn't know true goodness.
Hmm.
You could know goodness, but you would not know true goodness. And there is a superficial goodness that evil destroys and initiates us into authentic goodness.
That's a good place to close.
Let's have you back just on that topic, Don. That's a rich one.
It's a rich one.
Well, thank you again for being with us, Brother Don. It's been an extraordinary week, and delighted to have Sister Mary Friedland from the Brahma Kumaris with us tomorrow to close out this week on the future of God. Thank you all for being with us, and great to have you back this week,
Okay,
Jim.
I'll sign back on in a second.
Yeah, and all of you can join Don in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tom. Brilliant program. See everybody tomorrow.